Welcome back to the Wealth Witches podcast. I'm your host, Katelyn Magnuson, and we have Leah Weinberg with us today. She's the founder of Weinberg Legal, an attorney, a recovering wedding planner, and the author of The Wedding Roller Coaster. After nearly a decade running her New York-based wedding planning company, Color Pop Events, she returned to her legal roots to support creative entrepreneurs and event professionals. She's also a longtime wedding pro educator with the Knot and Wedding Wire and speaks at industry events all over the world. So Leah, welcome. I'm very excited for this topic today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So today we're going to chat about the differences between employees and contractors. And I know that we field a lot of questions and we always have to give the disclaimers on our end that you need to consult someone that is a professional in this industry, but here's some good metrics and guidance. And I know that we were chatting at the beginning of this before we started recording about the wedding industry in particular. But I would love to just take kind of this, what is it, 10,000 foot view. One, tell us a little bit about yourself, why you ended up leaving wedding planning and going back to your legal roots and all of that. And then I'd like to really dive into some of the key differences that people may not understand between employees and contractors.
Yeah, so I'm telling everybody I'm having my full circle moment right now because I started my adult life as an attorney, took a 10-year detour to be a wedding planner, and then as of the beginning of 2023, decided to go back to being an attorney. COVID changed a lot of things for a lot of people, but really
Yes.
changed the landscape of wedding and event planning. And it just became something that I didn't really want to do anymore. And so luckily had the legal background to fall back on and change careers. So that is how I ended up back where I am today.
What a full cycle moment. Yeah, we went through the ringer because about 80% of our clients are wedding service
Mm,
industry individuals. And I feel like the buzzword of the 2020 to 23 realm was just pivot, pivot, pivot,
yeah.
pivot. What are we
Yeah.
doing? How do we? So, yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, I made a big pivot.
Yes, yes, you did. You embodied that fully. So,
Yes.
I know when I'm talking with clients, a lot of times they play a little fast and loose, in my opinion, probably your opinion, but I'll let
Yep.
you disclose that with just everyone that they work with as a contractor, their associate photographers, their, event planners that they're working with. And I think that while you absolutely can be working with some people that fall in the contractor realm, I think that there is just a lot of misinformation around it. So,
Yep.
can you give us a nice rundown of the differences between the two?
Yes. So, from a very high level perspective, your employees and independent contractors are the people working for you, working with you. And everybody or every company who's working for you or with you has to fall into one of those buckets. They've either got to be an employee or they have to be an independent contractor. With employees, that comes along with a lot of state and federal regulation. So there's a lot of rules around employees, whether it's withholding taxes, paying into unemployment and disability, having workers' comp, overtime requirements, minimum wage requirements, all of that stuff. On the other hand, with your independent contractors, that relationship is basically governed by a contract. Some states have some regulations in terms of payment requirements for independent contractors and some protections, but it is not nearly as detailed and intense as the requirements around employees. Now, where this gets very sticky is that every single state has a different way of classifying employees and independent contractors. And then to add an additional layer on top of that, you've also got to make sure you're complying with the federal rules around employees and independent contractors. So this is why Katelyn and I will say all day long that if there's any doubt, and frankly, even if there isn't any doubt, please contact a professional. Contact your attorney to talk about this. Accountants can also give some advice on this, but attorneys in the state where you live are really going to be the definitive source. And yeah, so unfortunately, it's such a gray area. And like you're going to listen to this conversation, and unfortunately, you probably won't come out of it knowing whether the people that are working for you should be one or the other because we just can't get into the very state specific stuff. We can talk generally about some of the factors, but yeah, it is. I apologize on behalf of like lawyers everywhere because it's such a mess. It's tricky. It's a gray area, and there are significant consequences for getting that classification wrong.
I know on my end a fair chunk of the consequences, but I would love for you to share with our listeners what some of those consequences can be if you misclassify someone, as a contractor instead of an employee, which I feel like is the most common
Yeah.
thing that would happen here, right?
Yeah, because you can always go the other way.
Right. And
Like
that feels a little
classifying,
safer.
yeah, if
Yeah.
you classify somebody as an employee when, they could have been an independent contractor, there honestly is no downside to that other than it's costing you a little bit more
Right.
money to do so. But yeah, the consequences are some fines and penalties. It's going to be paying back amounts owed that you should have been paying to the state and to the government for certain things, looking back and making sure you were having workers' comp. So it's just going to be very costly. And I'm sure those of you listening are saying, well, how do I get in trouble? And one of the conversations I always have with people is like, how do I get caught? So in this situation, if you have somebody working for you, you terminate that working relationship, they might file for unemployment because they don't know better. And that is going to trigger the state to, you're going to get a notice from the state that says, hey, this person filed for unemployment. And then the ball is in your court to say, oh, this person was not, like, provide evidence of why this person wasn't an employee, why they should have been an independent contractor. And yeah, there are people, they just honestly they don't know better. Another way things happen is if somebody gets injured on the job and makes a claim for workers' comp. Or one of my theories is, how you go to the doctor and you fill out all these long forms, but there's always that question on there that says, is this injury related to an on-the-job accident? And if you unknowingly check yes, my guess is that's going up, getting escalated up the chain for somebody to take a look into, like, was this a workers' comp issue?
It absolutely does through the insurance experience because
Yes.
I've experienced the other side of that. So
Okay. Yes. So exactly. That's how you get caught. And then, surprise, the states will just also do random audits of you. I know two people who have been who are in the wedding industry in different states whose businesses have been randomly audited. And at that point, it's up to you to prove that they were rightly classified as independent contractors and shouldn't have been employees. And the state's the ultimate arbiter of that. And so you might believe with all your heart that somebody was an independent contractor, but unless you can show it based on your particular state's classifications, you are going to lose that argument.
I will throw one other scenario out there that I have experienced with a different client. They had someone that was classified as a contractor, and that contractor, they parted ways. They parted ways poorly. And that contractor went and essentially filed a complaint, I believe, with the state's Department of Labor and started an
Yes.
investigation because they believe they'd been misclassified and it didn't come to a head until things had ended poorly. And they were found that they had been misclassified and the client
Yes.
owed back payroll taxes, back UI. It was just an absolute cluster for
Yes.
them and for the individual. And they weren't trying to do anything malicious. They just didn't know better.
Yeah. Sometimes the people are trying to do something malicious. So
Well,
just
that the
know that
person
too.
did. The client was not
Oh,
trying to
the
be.
oh, the
Yeah, the
client. Sure,
client
sure,
wasn't.
sure.
Yeah,
Yes,
the
yes. So
the
yes.
disgruntled former contractor was absolutely
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep.
out
That is,
for, yeah.
yeah, I know of a situation like that as well. So yes, that is absolutely another way that this happens. So, like, I know it's gonna be, well, I mean, maybe you can speak to this particular part, but I know the pushback I get a lot is people are afraid that it's gonna cost them a fortune to put somebody on payroll. And, like, anecdotally, I've heard that it's really not as much as, like, people are afraid of.
So you have to keep in mind, we went from just myself and a few contractors, 2019 and before, to this is really awful. And I should know everyone, but I think we have 9 team members now that are employees, and
Mm.
then a couple of, very part-time project-based contractors. And with that, one of the biggest things for me, because there's the ABC test, there's some other things that you may be looking at.
Yeah.
And I was always really worried about what is this going to mean for me? It's going to come with a whole bunch of hassle. But then it got to the point where I had an S election. And when I did the S election, I have to set up payroll anyways. And so I got payroll set up for myself in 2019. And then I was like, okay, I've already dipped my toe in the water here in Idaho. This is a little bit niche here, but in Idaho specifically, you need to have, I'm going to say you need to have, generally you need to have UI even if you're a sole owner, sole employee, whereas a lot of states you don't need to have unemployment insurance if you're the sole owner, sole employee. So I already had that set up. And the only thing that I was missing was workers' comp to be able to hypothetically bring on my first Idaho-based employee. And so for me, I started really, really small with a part-time individual because I was able to dip a toe in because that was the next chunk of fear was, oh my God, am I going to be able to, it's not project-based. It's not an associate photographer when I have a specific event. It's someone that I am, setting payout for X amount of and benefits and everything else. I will say when I'm looking at the cost, yes, there are added employer expenses. There is vacation. There, is health insurance if you choose to offer it. There's, unemployment insurance. There's work comp. There's any other like fringe benefits that you might offer, right? However, most hourly employees or even salaried employees are making a lower hourly rate than they are as a contractor. So when I'm talking to clients about pay or they're looking to bring someone from one to the other, part of what we're talking about, again, assuming that they have chatted with a lawyer to make sure they're classifying them appropriately or making a change. A lot of times we'll see someone go from independent contractor to I want to bring them on full time. They're amazing. I want them in my business. I want to do right by them. And so we talk about pay. And a lot of times, let's say you're paying a contractor $50 an hour, the equivalent pay for that may be 35 to 40 an hour, depending on what it looks like. So I'm not going to say that it always shakes out to be more or less expensive. I actually think that if done well, they can be relatively equivalent, but the burden of some of that is shifting from the independent contractor to you. And what I mean by that is, and I'm sure you can speak to this as well, we have to have absolutely, bang up employment contracts, right? Which you should have good independent contractor agreements as well. But it becomes significantly more important, especially, we're in all of our team members are in at will states, which influences some of our, contract information. But there's just a little bit more there because you may be in states where you have to have cause to let someone go or where you're on the hook for, what you're needing to do there versus it may not be the same on the independent contractor side. So I'm looking at a little bit more that way. Also, you generally are providing equipment for the employees, which can be an added expense versus you're generally not providing equipment for independent contractors. And so those can be added or I feel like hidden costs that are outside of the, payroll or contractor pay
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Hopefully that like helps people feel a little bit better about the situation.
Yeah, we run a lot of cost comparisons, like state
Yeah.
specific cost comparisons, because it's not always terribly expensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, that's exactly the advice that I give folks when they're coming to me thinking, like, okay, I'm considering hiring for this role and it's likely going to be an employee. And I say, okay, here's what's going to make them. Here are the factors in this state that's going to make them an employee. But I say, always talk to your accountant, have them run the numbers and tell you what is this going to cost you, and
Right.
do that analysis. Like, there's always that. It really should be that two-part of like, talk to your attorney about how somebody should be classified and then go talk to your accountant to understand what it's going to cost you.
Exactly. And then you can
Yep.
make an informed decision either way, which is the whole
Yes.
point,
Yep.
in my opinion, of having professionals and being able to make these decisions is it's not right or wrong if you choose to hire someone or not, but you go into it knowing what you're looking at and being able to make an educated decision.
Yep.
I feel like you fall in the same area that I fall in where I'm giving information or educational information, but it's generally it depends or in general because there are so many nuances, right? For your individual situation, for the individual state that you're in, for the exact business entity type, you put all of these different layers on there and you're like, as
Yes.
a general overarching rule of thumb, this could be true for a chunk of humans. So obviously, state specificities aside, in a general sense, what are some areas where you could even be thinking like, oh, I might be verging on misclassifying this person that's been a
Yeah.
contractor for me?
Right. Since we are recording video and I always
Yes.
keep this within arm's reach, my friend gifted me
I
this
need
mug
that. Oh my God.
because like it's the perfect lawyer
That's
mug
my
because
catchphrase.
yeah,
Yeah.
it depends.
I'm
So I'm so glad you
dying.
said it for me. I didn't have to be the bad guy and answer that way. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's one of the big things that always is a big piece of this is thinking through, and this is like to figure out if somebody should be an independent contractor. Like thinking about number one, what is the service they are providing to you? So are they doing something for you that is not what your business does? So for example, easy, what your wedding planner, and you are hiring somebody to design your website. your business is not designing websites, your business is wedding planning. And assuming that you're hiring a company, an LLC or whatever, to do this work for you, assuming that person has their own independent business, they do this work for other people, that very much looks like independent contractor. There is a particular factor in certain states, and some of the states I've looked at, where if the person is doing the same work for you that your company does for the public, that is going to make them look more like an employee. And the folks in those states are, especially when it comes to your associate photographers and associate planners and associate DJs, those are the people in the states that are really going to kind of be, I don't want to say screwed by the classification, but they're the ones that are always the most unhappy with me when I
Right.
tell them that that is one of the
How dare you?
factors.
Yeah.
I give presentations, and like when I talk about that, if I'm in particular states and I go through that factor, and I just watch everybody's face just fall when I say that out loud
You
as
just
one
gave
of
them
the
this whole
factors.
action item of to do things and worry for the
Yes.
last 5 years they've been in
Yep.
business.
Yeah. So, like, a big thing is what type of work is the person doing for you? Does the person have their own entity? Are they performing this same work for other people? With employees, a lot has to do with control. The control factors, one of the big pieces you'll see and is pretty common across a lot of tests in the states and also federally. And so, that's how much control you have over what they're doing. Where are they doing the work? If you're making somebody come into an office, most likely that's going to make them look a lot like an employee. If you are not necessarily making somebody come to an office, but they are expected to like be on call and like answering emails or be available for phone calls from like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, that's going to look like an employee. Whereas if it's somebody that works remotely and you give them a task to do and they can do it at 2 o'clock in the morning if they feel like it, or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're obviously welcome to give them a deadline, but like that lack of just oversight is something that it cuts in favor of them being an independent contractor.
You're agreeing on the deliverable essentially instead of handling A through Z of the process that they're getting to that
Right.
deliverable.
Exactly. Yeah. And specifying like, oh, you have to like do this you have to be able to answer my phone calls during working hours, or I need this, right away kind of thing, or, I want you available by email. It's just that expectation of the control,
Hmm.
training, like how much training goes into it, whether you are reviewing work performance, like having a review process or a feedback process or writing reports on somebody's performance, that's more employee like. And so, yeah, it's really that the control piece is kind of the big overarching thing that we're looking at in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, that's what I keep coming back to as well. When I read through it, and not as a lawyer, but just as a general human working to be involved. On the flip side of that, because I feel like we just had a lot of people go, oh, on the
Yeah.
flip side, what are some general scenarios, again, not state specific, where, and I feel like you touched on them a few, like I was thinking even in my business, we have someone that's a graphic designer. Right. She does something that we're not doing in the slightest. She'll help
Yeah.
with like some social media graphics or something for the website. And it's ad hoc, and it's as things pop up, and it's not something that we're selling. She has her own business. She does this for
Yeah.
other clients as well. I feel very comfortable in that, she is an independent contractor setting her rates, agreeing upon deliverables, timeframes, etc., but we're not dictating her schedule to her. But what are some other sort of common
Yeah.
situations where someone would generally be in that independent contractor realm?
Yeah, people like virtual assistants, copywriters, you said graphic designers, website designers, social media managers, assuming that you are not a social media like a creative
Yes.
agency or a social media management. Those are the type of roles. Obviously, your accountants and your lawyers are not your employees unless they're in-house people
Solely,
like
yeah,
on
exactly.
payroll. Yeah. So it's a lot of these sort of the people that are in support roles for your business that help you run the business itself, like the behind the scenes business, as opposed to like the client facing service portion of your business. Those are the types of people that are, and businesses that will most likely be independent contractors.
Now, this is a little bit more of a nuanced one, but I've actually had this come up specifically. So let's say someone is a business owner, and let's use a wedding planner as an example. You have a wedding planner and you have a virtual assistant for them, right? This virtual assistant has had 5 other wedding planning clients. Again, we're not getting state specific, but this has popped up and I think it's really interesting. And this particular wedding planner gets busier and busier and busier and is taking more and more of the VA's time, mutually agreed upon. VA is very excited, gets to the point where the VA doesn't have any other clients outside of this one particular individual. Is that an area where you feel like, again, not state specific, but someone could be getting into that misclassification realm if they're working solely for them, even if they have their own LLC?
Yes. I mean, again, it's very context specific, but getting to like what you're alluding to in a bigger picture is like, yes, somebody's role absolutely can morph from one or the other. I always think like, let's say you have somebody who is definitely an employee, they're like your office manager. And so they're in the office working with you 9 to 5. Your business slows down. They don't have as much to do. They decide, okay, I'm going to move out of state and just keep doing this like admin work for you remotely. And then they decide to open up their own virtual assistant company and start doing this type of admin work for many people. In that situation, that does look very much like an employee who is probably converted to independent contractor. And it can absolutely go the other way. Like you said, you've got a virtual assistant who maybe was doing a limited number of hours for you each week. They had a business, they were doing it for other people, but then they start doing more for you. You're the only person they're working for. They're getting more involved in the actual planning piece. Like they start reaching out to clients for you. They maybe start drafting timelines or doing floor plans and helping with more of that stuff. Then yeah, absolutely. You can also morph the other direction from independent contractor. So I typically recommend people on an annual basis, make sure you are auditing people's roles and seeing if
Mm-hmm.
things have changed. Because one of the pieces, to go back to our earlier conversation of how do you get caught, if you have somebody who like over the course of a year has like you're like midstream, you are just changing their role significantly. And so that leads you to at the end of the year, providing them with both a 1099 and a W-2. That is going to be a big flag to the state that says, hi, please come and take a look at my business. So that's why I think annually, like maybe obviously you sometimes you can't control things that happen in the business, and yeah, maybe you're just like, I've got to expand the role, I've got to bring them on as employee, and you just kind of take the risk at
Right.
having paying them both ways over the course of the year. But if it's something you can kind of strategically plan for your business, ideally where it's like, okay, as of the beginning of the next calendar
Mm-hmm.
year, that's when I'm going to expand this person's role and reclassify them. Like that is a very helpful way to do it. So just to kind of make sure you're taking a look at people's roles on an annual basis is going to be helpful.
Now, I'm assuming here that the ideal situation would be you're doing this proactively, right? You're just like we talk on the accounting side, the more you can ask a question. We had someone wonderful come to us and she's like, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing this or this. Which would you recommend?" Versus the, "Hey, I've done this thing. It's been 3 years. I may be wrong." I'm assuming it's the same way on your end, but I would also question, is this something where, like, let's say I'm the business owner and I'm wanting to have this annual audit or review of my team members, the people that I work with in my business. And I sit down and let's say we're being proactive. We're going to say I sit down in October, plenty of time before the first of the year, hypothetically. And I meet with my accountant and I meet with a lawyer that has experience and is licensed in the state that I'm in. What happens when I have team members? Let's say I'm in, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I was going to pick California. Let's say I'm
Okay.
in,
Yeah, if anybody's tuning in from California, disregard this podcast episode and go immediately to talking to a lawyer in
I was
your
going to say, if
in
anyone's from
their your
California,
state.
holler. We have several California based attorneys specifically for
Mhm,
California things because, yes,
mhm.
California, love it, but is very,
It is home
very,
world.
very particular for anything on this realm of things. So let's just say Oregon for kicks here.
Okay, great.
You're in Oregon and you have a contractor in, I don't know, Minnesota and an employee in Oregon and someone else that's in Arizona. Are you needing to find one person, an ideal, like one lawyer in an ideal realm that is licensed and able to operate in those? Is this something where, you're needing to get, because again, small business owner hat, this can get expensive really quickly, I feel like. Are you then you have your lawyer in Arizona, you have your lawyer in, I think I said Minnesota or Michigan, one of those ones. What does that look like in your opinion in an ideal scenario for a small business owner?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal scenario, you're getting that counsel from people in those particular states. So when it comes to independent contractors, it's less of a concern because the
Hmm.
contract that you have with the independent contractor is going to be specific to either the state where you are or the state where they are. Fun, like little side tidbit note, if it's a true independent contractor, they should be the one providing the contract, and probably that the contract should be governed by the law where the independent contractor is located. Like that's in some places that is one of the factors, like who's providing the
Hmm.
contract. And so, yeah, with independent contractors, it's a little bit less tricky, but with employees, yeah, you're having to comply with the state where you are physically located, but also making sure you are complying with the law of the state where that person is located. I've even run into this with people who are hiring like contractors overseas, where, yeah, they're also responsible for complying with the laws of the state where like they're hiring those people. So it gets complicated. It is worth making sure you're chatting with all of your like professional service support team people to really analyze what's the best way for me to handle this situation. Like, should I just be hiring local so that way I'm making sure I can just work with an attorney in my state to make sure that I'm complying with these laws, as opposed to, especially as a small business owner, working with people in
Hmm.
a lot of different states, that's going to make you subject to a lot of different rules.
This is top of mind for me because we went through that. We have employees in multiple states. And so we do have a different lawyer slash firm in multiple states specifically for employment law. And it does get very expensive very quickly.
Yep.
And it is something that is nice to keep. If you have a few states, keeping it in the few states and really not wanting to add new ones in there,
Yeah.
particularly for employees, because it does get cost prohibitive and a little bit more. That actually, I think, is where a lot more of the cost can come in
Yes.
versus the actual employment costs themselves. It's all
Yeah.
of that back end work that comes in.
Yeah.
Something that I was thinking about that I feel like I've had clients pipe up with, because I know you and I were talking about like, oh, but I talked to other people in my industry and they said they're doing it this way. And it's very much the, business version of, yeah, but if they jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff too? Kind of a thing. Just because they're doing it doesn't mean they're doing it right. And with that, I have heard, well, I have a contract with them. I have a contract with the independent contractor. Doesn't that, protect me?
Yes, I always say just because you say in a contract that somebody's an independent contractor does not make them an independent contractor. In some states, it is a consideration, though. I do know in
Right.
Florida, like what the intent of the parties, like the intended relationship of the parties, is one of the 10 factors in the state of Florida that get considered. So, like, if you have an independent contractor agreement with somebody in Florida, that gets factored into the overall analysis. But yeah, just because other people are doing it a certain way, just because you have a contract that says you're an independent contractor, not an employee, doesn't make it so.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Wouldn't it be nice if we could just do that? I
It
want to
would.
throw in here because I
Yeah.
don't know if we're going to get to this, but I thought for the last segment, this is where I thought you were going, where if somebody realizes that they've misclassified somebody and need to switch midstream, there are, I know at least federally, and I haven't had to do this. So, like, again, this is not like this is just informational purposes, but you can sort of you can essentially sort of like tell on yourself. I know at least to the gut, like
Was it
to,
voluntary disclosure, I think,
yeah,
or something like,
something like
yeah.
that, where like you could say, hey, IRS, oops, I messed up and I misclassified this person. So I'm going to pay money into this fund to make up for that. And that actually ends up saving you money than if you were to get caught and get audited. So I don't know offhand if all states have similar things where you can kind of play the play the oopsie card and
Oops. Yeah.
pay
Yeah.
some money in order to save money in the long run of like the money that you would have to spend on an audit. But that's definitely something like if you're listening to this episode and you're getting really nervous, like chat with an employment law expert who can give you some guidance on that
I have
situation.
experienced that on the sales tax side where they have a voluntary disclosure for, oh no, I
Uh,
wasn't charging sales tax. I need to be. And most states have a program. So I would anticipate that a lot of states
yeah.
do because my belief at the end of the day is the state and the IRS just want their portion of income, their portion of revenue. They're not, you may get it too, but one of the biggest fears that we have pop up is, I don't want to go to jail. Are you
Oh.
going to be paying the IRS when you're in jail? Really? No. no, you're
They
generally,
just want
come
their
on.
money.
They
They
just
just
want
want
their
their money.
money. That's it. They're just sending you scary letters because they want their money and you won't pay attention to them otherwise because you have a stack of mail that you've been ignoring for the last 5 months on your desk.
That was
So,
like the BOI filing where everybody's
oh my
like, oh my
God.
God, I can go to jail if I don't file this. I mean, let's talk about all the poor people putting out content that we're having to like amend. They're like, here's what the BOI is. And then, nope, just kidding. They repealed it. Nope, it's back on again. Nope, just kidding.
Honestly, on
Nope.
TikTok, because I did put out a few informational pieces about it, it was great for engagement because the second I put something out, they would change it. Everyone's like, "Nuh-uh, you're wrong," and I'm like, "Yes, I currently am. That is totally correct. I need to start time stamping these because they have flip
Yep.
flopped more times than the fish."
Yeah,
No,
that was a ridiculous exercise.
it was absurd. Yeah, no, I did not love that, and I would, yeah, and then everyone was like making it a moral, well, they don't need my information. You know what? We make agreements. When you decide to be a business owner, you decide that you're going to comply with a certain set of things, and those rules may change. Just like when you're an employee, you agree to fill out certain amounts of paperwork and provide information.
Right.
If you don't like it, don't be a business owner. And it was
Right.
just people were getting so sassy about it.
But
I
also,
was
like,
more
if
sassy
you
about it
think,
changing.
yeah, I mean, if you think about in their personal lives, the amount of like personal information they're giving ChatGPT and who knows where that
Yes.
information is going, and then they like
Yes.
take the moral stand on, I don't want to disclose who like the person is behind the LLC. Yeah, it's pretty
Like,
funny.
okay, Bob, you have,
Yeah.
yeah, you have a little corner store. Like, I'm pretty sure you're fine. And they know what, yeah, wild.
I
So
mean, you
for,
go to Disney World now and they fingerprint you and take your picture. So it's
I know,
like,
it's a little intense. Yeah, it's gotten a little wild. No, that's like the BOI was the least of my concerns. Was like,
yeah,
yep, okay, here you go, just
yeah,
check off the box. Let's be
yeah,
done. For someone that is listening to this, that is like, oh, I might be in that gray area, or I might be fully out of that gray area and in a concerning area. Where do you recommend that they start even looking for someone? Because that's something that I struggled with as a small business owner, is finding a lawyer that wasn't some huge corporate law firm that didn't understand me or my business, but
yeah,
also someone that, had a little bit of a support system and understood what I was even doing.
yeah.
So where should they start?
Yeah. Well, before we even get into that, because I think there's
Yeah.
a piece that can be helpful in terms of because we are obviously we're not giving state specific information. So I
Yes.
think question number one is how do I find out what my state's things are so that I can
Great
even
point.
figure out, am I
Yes.
doing this right or am I doing this wrong? So honestly, in this case, Google is your friend. Just Google whatever your state is. And then like literally I do this to like double check my stuff, like New York employee versus independent contractor. That is literally what I type in. And where you're always going to want to start is with a government website. Do not pay attention to the AI summary. It can be wrong. It can be very misleading. So you're going to want to go, and I promise you, your state is going to be one of the top things that pops up. It's going to be very easy to find. Your state government website is going to give you whatever the test is or the list of factors. If you want a little more information, like maybe some more explanatory things, then law firm blogs can also be like, they're sort of like the second tier. So I always say start
Right.
with the government website, potentially go look at some law firm blogs because they're going to make sure that the information they're putting out is going to be accurate. Always check the date on those things to make sure that they're current. So once you've done that, and then you're like, oops, I've been doing this wrong. I need to find an attorney. I don't have, I mean, it's hard. So because like I am only in a certain number of states. I understand small businesses, particularly wedding and event businesses. I always tell people, like, if you need a recommendation, always, I mean, your people, anybody listening is welcome to email me or message me to see if I know somebody in the state that they are in. Because a lot of times I can get recommendations. But you want to start off by asking your friends, your family, also your colleagues, who are the other people within your networks using? And I would imagine you will find at least somewhere to start. And even within that, attorneys themselves have huge networks. And so if you find somebody and it turns out, like they cost a fortune, I promise you they're going to know somebody else in the market who serves small businesses who's going to have a rate that might be more within your
Right.
budget. So it's kind of about like just feeling out, like pulling the thread, starting
Yeah.
with like, who do I know that's using a lawyer? Let me talk to that person. If they're not the right fit, they will hopefully send me to somebody else. Like I said, I'm happy to provide recommendations or try to help people find folks. Like, for example, I needed an employment specialist in Illinois. And so I talked with somebody who's at a big firm, and she's like, my rates are probably not going to make sense for your clients, but here is somebody who left our firm, started their own practice, and who could probably be a better fit. So you'll get a lot of recommendations. I always tell people it is worth shopping around. I want you to like your lawyer. I want you to get along with your lawyer. I want you to trust them, because if you feel hesitant or like you cringe every time you think about having to reach out to your lawyer, that's going to make you hesitant to reach out to them in situations when you really need to be reaching out to them. So like, I want you to like them. I want you to get along. I want you to like their vibe. I want you to like feel like you can connect with them. It's so important. And my motto, honestly, is I always say, start a relationship with an attorney before you need one, because it's going to take you time to find somebody. And
Hmm.
so, do you really want to be in a situation where things are exploding and you're super stressed and add to the stress of that by having to find a lawyer in that moment? Or do you want somebody who's going to answer your panicked email at 4 o'clock on a Friday? Because if you want to get a response, you're going to have to know that person in advance, because
Yes.
nobody, probably other than me, is like responding to that email. And sometimes I don't respond to those cold emails. I do most of the time, but weekend stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is so worth like shopping around and just getting to know somebody, understanding their fee structure. Do they quote flat rates? Do they bill hourly? Do they require a retainer? How often are you getting invoiced? Like, knowing all of that up front, so that when you need them, you know how to budget for it. You know that you can like afford their services, is going to bring you just so much peace of mind than waiting till something goes wrong and like panicking and having to find somebody in that moment.
It's that whole being proactive instead of reactive, for
Yes.
sure. For anyone listening, what states are you able to work in?
Yes. My firm serves New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Georgia, Florida, Illinois, Texas, and California. For
Lucky you
trade,
with
if people,
California. Yeah.
yeah, like full disclosure, California Employment Matters, I would refer out to like I would find specific referrals for employment lawyers in
Valid.
California. Because I
Valid.
don't want to, my counsel in California does not want to touch those with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, we would do that. But like, I'm pretty, more so than I think a lot of people, I'm really open about like what I think is a good fit for me and when I think something is over my head. And I'm really
Yeah.
cautious about not taking on something that I feel like I'm not able to do. But I also wanted to mention, if people have like if they need to file trademarks and stuff, that's something that I can do. It's not related to, that's not state based. So that's across the country. But yeah,
Love a good trademark. Yeah.
yes, we can do a
Okay.
whole other episode on
I
trademarks.
know. I know. I was just thinking that. I was like, yeah, because I think that's really important too. So I feel like if anyone is, I want to say, because something that I look for as well when I'm talking with potential clients, I want them to like us as well, right? Because I feel like
Yeah.
so many people run into, I feel like accounting and legal, you end up with yeah, it's my dad's like crusty old accountant, right? And like they
Hmm.
don't really get my business and they kind of pat me on the head and they say, oh, you're so cute, but they're not actually getting advice. They're not getting looked at as a real business owner. They're not getting I had someone say that their accountant made them feel stupid every time they talked to them.
I've
And I
heard
was like,
that. Yeah.
that's not a good feeling. Or the flip side of they bill me every time I ask a question. I don't know
Oh,
what I'm going to get billed. I don't ask questions.
that. Yes. Yes.
And I
Yes.
don't want that because I want you to ask us questions year round so that we can give you information and we don't bill. Actually, like if you're on, we like to work in a certain way so that you don't have to worry about asking questions because I want the questions so that we can avoid as many pitfalls
Yes.
as we can as a business owner.
Exactly.
So some
Yeah.
people really like the hourly billing and maybe the lower initial rate and to each their own, but I really 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 want to make sure that you vibe with your lawyers, your accountants, really anyone that you're working with, but especially in those areas because I feel like
Yeah.
it is so overlooked because they're looked at. I mean, look at you. You are the antithesis of boring. right? We've got fun colors, we've got like your personality, and I feel like so many times people will just look at legal and accounting as like it's a necessary evil. It's not actually. It's a really fantastic tool and a partnership. So
Yes.
take the time to make it a partnership
Yeah.
because it's probably one of the best things you can do in your business.
Absolutely.
Hands
I've
down.
heard from people, somebody said to me, I had this law firm draft my contract and I felt so intimidated by them that I was too scared to ever ask them questions about what something meant. There's things in my contract I don't know what they mean and I felt like I couldn't ask them what they mean. And that just absolutely like breaks my heart. And similarly with the, incremental billing thing, I always tell my clients like I'm more sort of like big project focus. Like if I'm drafting a contract for you, I'm billing for like that work. But if your clients
Yeah.
have comments, if you have questions, I say always come back to me because I want to make sure you get it right. I like similarly, I don't want them to be afraid of like, oh my God, she's going to bill me for a 15-minute email. I don't want to do it. And then I'm going to agree to something that's going to really screw me over in the future. I'm like, no,
Yes.
let's talk about it. I want to make sure you handle it. I say, like, I'm always going to tell you before something becomes billable. So, like,
Yes.
please always just come back to me first. Don't, don't try to,
Imagine that.
don't
Yeah.
DIY your
Please,
paralegal
yeah,
or
please don't
accounting
DIY.
services.
Please don't DIY. Oh God. No, 100%. So, Leah, where can
Yes.
everyone find you if they want to learn all of the things or inquire or ask for recommendations?
Absolutely. Yeah. My website is weinberglegal.com. I'm also at the Leah Weinberg and at Weinberg Legal on Instagram. My email address is on the website. People can also DM me if they feel like it. There's a contact form. There's plenty of ways to get in touch. So yeah. And like I said, I'm happy to always, provide recommendations if I'm not in your state, if people have things that come up and they just like need to chat about something. I like to be as helpful as humanly possible.
That's a good goal, right? It is. Okay. Well, thank you so much. All of those will be linked in the notes. So everyone can easily go check out everything that you're all about.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Wealth Witches podcast. I hope our magical money talks have left you feeling empowered and inspired. Remember, wealth isn't just about dollars in the bank, it's about abundance and financial freedom in all aspects of your life. I'm Katelyn Magnuson, encouraging you to keep challenging the status quo and embrace your inner witch on this financial journey. Until next time, stay magical.